Welcome to Rising Tide Startups, where today's most exciting solopreneurs share their startup stories. They also deliver tangible strategies that they would implement personally if starting their business over today. Each episode is a startup masterclass. Make sure you take notes. Take it away, Kevin.
This is Kevin Pruitt with another episode of Rising Tide Startups, and my guest today is Gro Dyrnes Gro. Thanks for joining us on Rising Tide.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited.
Well, it's a pleasure, and I do have to tell you, this is our second crack at the whip here, because we had an interview a couple of days ago, and I forgot to hit the record button. But I am fully confident that this one's even going to be better. The first one was great, but this one's going to be better because now I've had more time to do a little research, so I can ask you even better questions than I did the first time. But thank you for just showing up twice.
No, absolutely. And I think this is a good way of proving the Silicon Valley quote, fail fast forward, because
Exactly.
That is actually one of the challenges that we in the Nordics have. We don't like to fail. And that's why it's also difficult to innovate in a big way. So.
Well, it is great that it's an interesting segue that you brought that up, because I'm going to circle back in just a couple of minutes about that very thing. But tell our listeners a little bit about Gro.
Yeah, so
first of all, pronounce your name.
Yeah, my name is Gro, but I actually like to say Gro because as the head of Innovation Norway, which is Norway's trade promoting and inward investment agency, that is what the job is pretty much about, to try and trigger sustainable growth in Norwegian economy and businesses by leveraging the global markets. And I am based out of Silicon Valley normally, and I've been there the last 6.5 years. Before that, I worked for the same organization for many years. And because I'm really passionate about our mandate, and I think that Norway has a lot of great sustainable solutions to promote to the market, and it's a pleasure to be paid to promote all of these good solutions, and not to mention a country that we would like to see even more travelers in going forward after hopefully the pandemic. We all manage the pandemic better.
Well, now, in our first time we chatted, take a step backwards and walk us through how you kind of ended up in this line of work.
Yeah, it was actually quite coincidental in that I'm an economist by training with psychology on the side. And back in business school, I didn't really understand much of the subject. SQL coding, for example. We had some classes in technology subjects, and I didn't really understand that much, but I did actually really well. And every time I tried to segue away from technology, it just came back and hit me in the back head. And so I learned to love it. And today I find my sweet spot in between technology and business development. And so I feel that coming from Norway and being allowed to work out of Silicon Valley is like winning the lottery twice. And so I originally worked for Accenture as a consultant, like every let's say good business graduate in my generation did. And after a couple of years, I felt like a small piece in a very big puzzle, and wanted to, follow my passions of exploring the world and understanding what makes people in different cultures tick, etc. And so I lived in an apartment together with 3 other people, and one of them came home one day and said he had applied for a job in the Norwegian Trade Council in Germany, and I asked, did they have any other great cities? And he said, yeah, London. So, and I had never been to London, so I thought, sounds like a great place. I applied for the job and got it. A little bit like I like to say, like Pippi Longstocking I've never done it before, so I'm sure I can do it.
Absolutely. So how long were you in London before you, and did you come from the UK to the US?
I did not. So I have been in London for 3.5 years, and then in Oslo for many years, then to San Francisco for a short period of time, back to Oslo, and then back to San Francisco in 2014.
And this is all with the Norwegian Trade Council or
Yes,
similar?
and Innovation Norway. Yes.
Okay. All
So
right.
trade promotion and inward investment promotion work. And also, we also represent the um, industry abroad. So visit Norway.
Well, tell us a little bit about the ethos behind Innovation Norway.
So the thinking is that obviously Norway is a small country and a much too small both market and economy to uh, not rely on an international and global market. And also we like to consider ourselves leading in some industries that are very important across the world, such as energy, maritime, aquaculture. And the thinking is that the market needs a trigger in order to grow internationally, and we are there to support that Norwegian industries can, or to try and lower the barrier basically, reduce the cost and time to market. So that's the thinking.
So, I mean, I think for people like myself that may not be all that familiar with kind of the Scandinavian strengths and weaknesses, but it seems like to me that Norway also has had a history of oil because of the reserves that may be in the North Sea or whatever. So, in our chat a couple of days ago in our chat and just starting today, I mean, you've never mentioned, that at all in any of your discussions. Do you see the Norwegian economy kind of moving away from that, or how does that fit into kind of the innovation side of things?
Yeah, so I think in many situations, Norway is not ranking top of innovation rankings because the traditional industry is not generally seen as an innovative industry, even though there are substantial amounts of IP, etc. And so Norway is a nation built on and by the sea. So we like to say we live by, off, and with the sea, or even in the sea. And we were seafarers back in history.
Mm-hmm.
And all our knowledge is about what is happening in the ocean. So everything from seafood to offshore wind, like you say, offshore oil and gas, energy, floating solar, and maritime shipping, not to mention.
Right.
And so when other nations found oil and were able to leverage that resource, Norway learned a lot from the Americans and from United Kingdom, and we, or our forefathers more correctly, were able to set up a governance system that has worked extremely well for Norway. So we have been able to develop a sovereign wealth fund that today we can say that the understanding of how to build that industry was based on the understanding of the ocean from the maritime industry. But today we can take a lot of the IP and bring it over to other ocean-based industries, such as offshore wind, such as floating solar, such as aquaculture, such as electrification and automation of shipping vessels, etc. And obviously, Norway wants to take its social responsibility and transition into more sustainable energy sources. And you can see that by the companies, the Norwegian companies such as Equinor, for example, changing its name from Statoil to Equinor, moving and investing considerably more into renewable technologies, and also through the sovereign wealth fund, setting standards for what companies to invest in, etc. We have certainly learned from the oil and gas industry, and we have to be extremely thankful for both the welfare and the knowledge that has helped us gain. But it's certainly, let's say, high engagement around more sustainable technologies these days.
Right.
And I think we can see from the new listing on the Oslo Stock Exchange called Merkur Market that there is a real passion for sustainable solutions these days.
I think that's a global passion. I mean, you mentioned really interesting when you said that, you know, a floating solar, you know, solution in Norway. I know as far north as Norway is, I know it depends on the seasons. I mean, there are times it's, you know, it's kind of, you know, it's bright almost at midnight, and then there are other times during the year that it may be dark, you know, multiple hours a day, you know. So I can see that almost being a seasonal solution versus,
yes,
you know, year round. But it's really interesting that Norway is kind of focusing on the solar side of things. I mean, that sounds like more of an equatorial, you know, solution.
Yes, and you're right. So floating solar is not something that's going to be substantial to the energy mix in Norway, but Norway is a great sandbox. Floating solar is not a solution where Norway is a big market, but Norway is a relevant sandbox, and we see that in many in many situations where the Norwegian market itself is not interesting as a market, but it's very interesting as a sandbox because we have surplus of clean energy from hydropower, and at a very reasonable cost. So it's a great place to both produce products, but also to, for example, run data centers if you don't have to have them very close to the market, but where you are dependent on reliable and low cost clean energy.
Right. That
makes
makes
a little bit
perfect
the
sense.
same for solar.
Right. And you said something earlier in the conversation about you know, the Silicon Valley kind of mentality of failing forward. And I told you before I hit the record button that I had watched a video clip of you. I think you were doing a seminar about Innovation Norway. But the interesting thing you said was that you said, you know, Norwegians or Scandinavians are not very good at promoting themselves using their CV, or you know, for most Americans, it would be a resume. And they said, you said something about, you know, Americans are really good at like promoting themselves or you know, I guess marketing themselves through their CV because they can, you know, write it in such a way that it looks good on paper, so to speak. But tell me about this whole mentality of kind of failing forward and why that's so important in Scandinavia.
Well, I would say we still have a long way to go with regards to failing fast and moving forward. And I think in Silicon Valley, they recognized a long time ago the importance of allowing you to fail, because if you are to try and innovate, there is high risk involved, and so you need to also be prepared to fail. And if you don't allow yourself to fail, then you may not be let's say open to learn from and accepting. First you need to accept that it didn't go as well as I hoped, what can I learn from it so that I'm not doing it again, or I'm adjusting slightly. And if you're not ready to say that I actually failed, then it's very difficult to learn. And also, I think the necessity to be prepared to take a high risk, it's not something, I think Nordic people are used to playing with low risk and kind of securing themselves. Maybe it's the cold weather, maybe it's the the fact that there are not that many people. You kind of have to rely on yourself and your closest and all of that. Or maybe it's just a lack of role models who have really grown fast, scaled fast, like we see in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
But it's not very common to play with really high risk and accept failure in the Nordics. It's something that we've started to learn over the, let's say, last maybe 5 or 10 years.
Well, it sounds like it. I mean, you've got a combination there where you can kind of learn from the DNA of Silicon Valley, but also, utilize any of the strengths that the Scandinavian countries would bring to bear, in that kind of a not really nice combination. And I mean, you mentioned earlier your background is in economics. Mine is as well. So I'm going to start with that was what my major was in university as well. So I'm going to start with the micro, and then we're going to move to the macro side of things a little bit. So micro, give me an example of say a company that you've worked with, and kind of walk us through the process of, how Innovation Norway kind of can help, or how you can help a company move through your kind of business process.
Yeah, so I can do one, which is the export side. Mm-hmm. So that would typically be, we worked with a company that quite a number of people internationally know today, called Kahoot. It's the EdTech platform. It's a quiz platform, and it engages kids any age, including adults,
right,
to learn through quiz games online. And you can develop your own games, or your teacher can develop a game or a quiz, etc. They came at the very, very early stage to our team in San Francisco back in, I think it was 2012. They had a research spin out from the biggest technical university called NTNU, and they were looking for a scalable, say, model through a 4-week program that we ran with them called Tech Incubator, which we run out of Nordic Innovation House, which is a co-working space, resource center, a networking hub for Nordic entrepreneurs and Nordic leaders and investors. The team came together and found the new product, basically developed a new product and scaled from there. Obviously, it's been a long road, and we haven't been heavily involved throughout the process, but we do provide financial services from Norway. We provide sparring services abroad, and also this co-working space, which they are still a part of. And only last week, SoftBank actually bought about 10% of the company for 2 billion Norwegian kroner. So that's certainly a success for us.
What's that the equivalent
and that's
in US?
Exactly. It's about a tenth, so about 200 million.
Not a bad start for 10%.
No, exactly. Certainly not for a Nordic company, for sure. So,
now, do you have
that's
to be
an
Nordic
example.
To take advantage of the co-working space? Do you have to be from Scandinavian countries, or is it just an interest in that as well?
So you don't have to be from any of the Nordic countries, but you need to have a company registered in one of the Nordic countries.
Okay.
Or you can be an American or a international company wanting to establish in Norway.
Right.
And that's when we would help you to identify what would be the right region for you, what is the easiest way to establish, who should you talk to of potential partners, potential investors, potential customers even. And so within 3 areas, particularly, we believe that international companies should look to Norway, which are within energy, maritime, and aquaculture.
Mm-hmm.
But also, actually, if you want to pilot within smart city, the electrification of the transportation ecosystem, for example, where Norway is highly connected and highly electrified, and also very well regulated
Mm-hmm.
for both electric and autonomous, both at land and at sea. And so if global companies are interested in testing out new markets or partnering up with global players in these industries, Norway does have that. So so we would also be supportive for global companies for sure.
Well, you mentioned you may have answered my second question already in the process of answering the first one, because when I was thinking more on a macro scale, maybe what are some primary industries that you may be looking to support? And I know I can remember 2 of the 3 you mentioned. I mean, for sure, the kind of the aquaculture and maritime, and what was the third one? You mentioned one other.
So energy, aquaculture, and maritime.
Right,
yeah.
is the energy sector. So, I mean, it sounds like to me that Norway is really diversifying in the energy sector in many, many ways. I mean, the electrification, the solar, what are either hydrogen, generated, water generated energy as well. So what are some other, kind of unique things that Norway's kind of just trying to, as you mentioned the term sandbox, what are some other things that they're looking at doing?
Yeah, thank you for asking, because together with the other Nordic countries, we do believe that we have a very strong value proposition in e-government or GovTech and within health, simply because we have health data categorized and registered and available for example, research. So we have, as an example, we have a collaboration with Lawrence Livermore in the US, where Norwegian health data of cancer patients is used in developing AI models in order to try and identify cancer for women before it actually happens. Wow. So to say. So and this is the same throughout the Nordic countries, where all cancer patients were registered back to around the 50s or 60s even, 60s or 50s even, with complete data. And so that is something that in the Nordic countries, we actually do trust our government with the data, but we do not necessarily trust the big companies. So it's quite the opposite of what we see in the US.
Exactly the opposite.
And that also enables the governments in the Nordics to actually be a very good partner for startups, because they get to actually test it out, and they get to let's say the governments are also helped by seeing and experiencing the novelty that these startups can bring to the market. So it's a good match.
So tell me, if you're speaking to our listeners and you're doing kind of here's a 1 minute advert, 1 minute promo of what you do. This is your time, it's your show. Talk to us about services that you can provide. Kind of sell us on the whole Nordic tracked entrepreneurship.
So Innovation Norway, we trigger sustainable growth in Norway, either by bringing Norwegian companies into the world with their sustainable solutions, or by helping foreign companies establish themselves in order to test out their solutions, also to bring more sustainable products into the global marketplace.
That is quite a mandate that you have ahead of you, because I mean, it is the Nordic countries have, you know, a high reputation globally of, you know, just education. They have a high reputation of taking care of their you know, members of society. I mean, just tourism is high. I mean, there are a lot of things that are going for it in, you know, in the Nordic countries, and I mean, it would be fun to be on the promotion board of an area like that does have such a high you know, visibility and high popularity, I guess, you know, worldwide. And I know that you all are doing a tremendous job, and I know that you have hurdles just like anybody else does to overcome, and obstacles to overcome. But is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you would just like to share as we kind of close out today?
Well, thank you so much for saying all those positive things about our region. And as we've talked about before, as soon as I have an open position in my team, I will offer it to you.
I work cheap. Go ahead.
but you're absolutely right. That's why I love my job, basically. So anybody interested in what we can provide from the region can go to a website called explorer.no, and we'd like to promote it as the Tinder of sustainable solutions meeting needs in the global market. But one of the things that I am curious about is, well, I would say maybe two things. I think one of the biggest benefits of the Nordics is that we are very equal societies. And so the general life, the general welfare is very high, and it motivates people to collaborate rather than compete. And that is a challenge that I see kind of developing. It develops in the wrong direction also in the Nordics, if you're concerned with equality as an important asset for a country. Mm-hmm. But it's moving much faster. Inequality is developing much faster in the US, and I think that's a challenge. That's a big challenge, and I'm let's say not only curious, but I fear the consequences of that, because we are all so dependent on a well-functioning American market. Right. We have learned so much. We still learn so much, and we need the US to be that, you know, market of the big dreams and the big ambitions and the big successes and results, etc. The big inspiration and role model in so many ways. The other thing is obviously what this pandemic that has hit us all.
Sure, yeah.
How is that affecting market dynamics? And as far as we can see, sustainability has been put much higher on the agenda in general.
I would agree.
Definitely in the Nordics, but I think also in the US. But I also see that investors in, for example, Silicon Valley, they don't seem to care that much where the company is from anymore. Mm-hmm. And hopefully when we move out of this pandemic, we have learned that it's totally fine to meet over Zoom, right, or whatever tool it is, Pexip, whereby just to mention some of the Norwegian innovations in that space. I always take the opportunity.
That's right.
But no, that's going to be really interesting to see, and I'm really hopeful that that has put us in a more equal position, so to say, in the competition with, for example, Silicon Valley-based companies.
I mean, you mentioned when we chatted a couple of days ago, you mentioned the idea of, the kind of the Nordic environment is a very flat structure, and I think that that's actually being, playing itself out as truth globally. I think with the pandemic and working remotely, being able to work from anywhere, really taking advantage of kind of the, voice over internet technology like Zoom or something like that, and have these virtual meetings, cutting down on travel. I mean, it really is more of a, a virtual world, and borders come down when you start talking about virtual worlds, when you start talking about a global workforce. And I think it just provides opportunities for people in countries that previously did not have this opportunity. And I also think that, time zones become less relevant. Travel is less relevant, and it's going to be interesting to see. I don't believe we will ever go back to what we were before, pre-COVID times, because you see it in some of the largest tech players in the world, are moving to almost a full time, virtual workforce, and they'll be spread virtually all over the world. So this may be a great time to innovate and to be on the cutting edge, and it sounds like you all are very much so on the cutting edge, and especially in some really unique industries or genres. And I want to applaud you for doing that. I love the whole concept of the putting countries together economically and marrying them together economically, and trying to create a trade route, so to speak, or the trade routes from 2,000 years ago, that we're kind of rebuilding through a virtual space. And it's just really going to be fun to kind of see what happens in the Nordic countries in the next few years. And I know that you all, have played a big part in that. So just thank you for joining us today and just sharing your story and just playing your part in helping all boats rise in a rising tide. Gro, it's been great having you today.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It's been great being a guest on the show too. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Another episode in the books. We hope you heard some great takeaways. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a 5-star review on iTunes and YouTube. As always, thanks for listening to Rising Tide.